now using their phones to read stuff, so here I am. Anyway, Dr. Haim lives with his wife and baby daughter in a small suburb of Dallas. During his residency, Dr. Haim served as the anonymous whistleblower in a story released by investigative reporter Christopher Rufo, which exposed that Texas Children's Hospital, the largest children's hospital in the world, I didn't realize that until I read this, was concealing its pediatric transgender medicine program from the public. The day after the story's release, the Texas legislature voted to ban transgender medical interventions on minors, in part due to this story. The Texas Attorney General's office subsequently opened an investigation into Texas Children's, with which Dr. Haim assisted in an official whistleblower capacity. Due to his whistleblowing, Dr. Haim was indicted by the Biden DOJ on 4 felony counts for allegedly violating HIPAA laws in what was largely seen as a weaponized prosecution. All charges were dismissed with prejudice in January of this year. Thank God Trump won. I can't imagine what would have happened had Trump not won, and his administration, Department of Justice, helped him get off of all those charges. They just dropped them all. Dr. Haim has also been a speaker at several Texas Values events for us, but this is my first time to hear you in person, and I'm thrilled that you're even sitting at our table also. So we are so honored and thankful for your courageous words, your courageous stand against what was so very wrong to the children of not just Texas, but all over the nation and all over the world. Really, we set the example right here in Texas. As Texas goes, so goes the nation, you know. So we are honored to have you in Texas as a doctor, and honored to have you tonight speaking for us. And please give them a warm welcome to Dr. Haim.
Thank you all so much for being here. Really, it's an absolute privilege. You know, if there was like a time machine and I were to be transported back to January of 2020, never in a million years would I imagine myself speaking at a dinner like this to a crowd of people like you, telling a story that is absolutely stranger than fiction. But I think it's a story for all of us, because how many of us over the past 5 years see ourselves in January of 2020 and don't recognize that person, right? The things we thought were true, the things we believed in, the people who we looked up to, all of that had changed over the past couple of years. Because how many of us thought that later that year in March, right, our entire society would descend into collective madness, that our country would lock down every single one of our citizens into a prison of our own making, that we would put filthy masks on all of us, on our children, whenever we go outside. We would lock our children away from the schools, keep them away from their friends. And how many people thought Joe Biden would get elected? Someone who was as foolish as he was senile. His Department of Justice, right, had inverted our justice system, had made the innocent into criminals, criminals into the victims, and the arbiters of justice have become the ones who are most committed to its destruction. But then it only gets worse, because how many of us thought that our country would be telling us that men can become women, women can become men, and everything in between? That cutting the breasts off of a 16-year-old girl is somehow medicine, and that affirming the delusions of a child is compassion. And then we have boys competing in girls' sports, taking away their opportunities, taking away their trophies, taking away their scholarships. How many of you thought that was possible? The people we are sitting here today are not the same people who were there in January 2020. And it's during times that are very challenging that people like us, we become molded, we become different right? We suffer, we endure this pain, right? But it changes us because either we preserve our soul, but that comes at a sacrifice, or we lose our soul.
Right.
We have that option, right? The reason we're sitting here today is because we decided to preserve it. But everyone has a story. So my story is all of our story because we had all gone through the same madness over the past 5 years. But in my case, it starts in March of 2022. I was general surgery resident at Baylor College of Medicine, one of the best training programs in the country, primarily affiliated with Texas Children's Hospital, the biggest children's hospital in the world, by like 300 beds. It's huge. And in March of 2022, the hospital had issued a statement to a bunch of media organizations that they were shutting down their transgender program because of the potential criminal ramifications. That's a quote, right? They were recognizing the risks of continuing this transgender program. But the reason they released that statement was because Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, had issued an opinion a few weeks before that these transgender interventions on children could constitute criminal child abuse. So it kind of makes sense why they would release that statement in March. They're saying, we're not doing this anymore. They want to get this aggressive Attorney General off their back. So I was working there at the time. I knew it was a lie. I knew it because I was working there. And the people who were doing the surgeries told me about it. These were 11, 12-year-old kids who they were implanting puberty blockers on, right? Affirming something that wasn't true, putting them down a road where they became chronic medical patients, something that they could never come back from. And at first, I just didn't believe it. It just wasn't true. How could this hospital that's so amazing, right, that does so many good things, lie about something so egregious? So more time went by. I just didn't believe it. And then we heard more stories, and the kids got younger. The stories got crazier. These were 11-year-old kids, and in the notes it was written, this 11-year-old girl is positive that she's a boy, that she absolutely wants more surgeries, that she never wants to have kids. Both parents are transgender. All the siblings are transgender. For any doctor, that is a red flag for child abuse, but they were taking those kids for surgery. I still didn't believe it. It was too crazy to believe it was true. But then any doubt in my mind was eliminated in January of 2023, when the directors of the transgender program, which supposedly didn't exist, that had no online web presence, which is very atypical for a children's hospital, were giving a lecture at the hospital's Grand Rounds lecture, the most prestigious lecture series in the hospital. If they were giving this lecture, this means it was a hospital-wide priority. And when they were giving the lecture, it makes sense that it was a priority for the hospital, because they were talking about their algorithmic approach to taking young children who believed they were the opposite sex, putting them into the psychology clinics, psychiatry, then endocrinology, and then surgery. This was happening throughout the entire hospital. Everyone knew the hospital said they shut it down, but they were continuing it behind closed doors. It was at that moment that I knew I had to do something. I'm a doctor, it's my responsibility. But as an individual, it's a moral responsibility. It's one of those times that all of us have gone through over the past couple of years, where something happens and we have the choice, do we preserve our soul or do we lose our soul? If we preserve it, we're gonna have to sacrifice something. So my wife and I talked about it. We knew everything we had been through, we could never look ourselves in the mirror if we didn't do something. So whatever came, we would have to take it, whatever risks there were. We knew it was the Biden administration. We knew they would try to take us down, but we had to do it. So I decided to anonymously blow the whistle in January 2023. But it took me 5 months to get a hold of a journalist. Most people just didn't believe me, or they thought I was crazy, which I can't really blame them, because it's like I was a no one at the time. And the story was pretty outlandish. But even the major news organizations, conservative news organizations, just didn't believe it. But then I got a hold of Christopher Rufo in mid-May 2023. And he saw what the story was. He saw what the potential was. And it came out at the best time possible. So the story was released on May 16th, 2023, and I was the anonymous whistleblower in that story. No one knew who I was. And the story documented how Texas Children's Hospital had lied about their program, but then continued it 3 days later. 3 days after that statement in March, they took an 11-year-old girl to the operating room to implant these puberty blockers in this girl's arm. But they not only continued it, they expanded it. That's what his story showed. I was the anonymous whistleblower. The story came out on May 16th. On May 17th, the Texas Senate voted to pass SB 14. So within 24 hours of our story coming out, the conduct we exposed was voted to become illegal in the state of Texas.
Yes.
And it was partially because of our story coming out that Democrats had voted in favor of it, like Sean Theory. That was on May 17th. On May 19th, you have an investigation that started by Ken Paxton into the hospital because of our story. On May 23rd, another whistleblower speaks out. It's a nurse who works in the clinic. She's since taken her story public. Her name is Vanessa Sidich. By the time she was anonymous too. She had a first-hand account of the horror that was happening behind closed doors. And then on May 28th, the CEO of TCH says that he's going to shut down the program in accordance with SB 14. I had done my part. I was anonymous. No one knew who I was. I just wanted to be left alone. And by that point, I was going to move on with my life. You know, I was close to graduating my surgical training. I had a job. My wife had just been hired as a federal prosecutor in Dallas. And, you know, we were just going to move on. But then our lives changed forever on June 23rd of that year. So a little bit over a month after the story came out. It was the day of my graduation from surgical training. One of the most important days of my life, right? You sacrifice everything, you know, to get to that moment. It was a Friday, a few hours before the ceremony. My wife and I were getting ready. We were about to meet with my parents, and then all of a sudden, right, I get a knock on my door. And I think to myself, like, man, who the hell is that, right? Who's knocking, you know, so aggressively? So I walk over, standing outside are 2 armed federal agents with Health and Human Services. And they tell me they're investigating a case regarding medical records. And there's this part of my brain, right? Like, you know, of course, you freak out in that moment whenever the feds show up to your home, right? You imagine yourself doing something cool, but that's not the case. Freak out. But in, you know, my primordial, you know, lizard brain, I knew exactly what was happening, right? They were using the value of my accomplishments for that day as the means to extort my compliance with their corrupt investigation. They came there on the day of my graduation to use that against me. But luckily, my wife is a brilliant attorney. She advised me not to speak with agents, and I didn't. But before these agents left, they gave me a target letter. That was when I found out I was being criminally investigated by the United States Department of Justice. And the prosecutor who was coming after me was an assistant U.S. attorney, Tina Ansari. So it was one of those moments, you know, like I mentioned before, where you're faced with something. You know, do you give in? Do you preserve your soul, or do you lose it? Do you become a shell of your former self? And we knew that we had to fight back. We knew that we had no option. If we were going to raise a family, we had to do something. So we got in touch with an amazing team of lawyers led by Marcella Burke, and all of you would love her. She's a, you know, crusader Catholic, rosary in one hand, middle finger in the other, bulldog in her right. And you know, it's a good thing we had this great legal team, because on that first phone call my attorneys had with Tina Ansari, we found out that she was a raging lunatic, that she was a radical ideologue. She told my attorneys that she had not even reviewed the evidence before sending agents to my home. But she did enough research to find out my wife had just been hired by the Department of Justice as a federal prosecutor, and used that to threaten us She told my attorneys that Andrea, my wife, is not going to have any problems with her background check unless she continues to become difficult. What she was referring to was my wife advising me to not speak with agents, something that's a constitutional right. We get off the phone, my wife and I look at each other, and I say, did we just get blackmailed by a federal prosecutor? Yeah, we did. And it only gets worse, because over the next 6 months, her behavior just became more and more unhinged, right? I was doing everything I could to remain anonymous, but she was doing everything she could to intimidate me into signing a plea deal, to admitting to a crime that never happened. And she was really pulling out her big guns, because the feds, right after agents came to my home, they got a warrant. They tapped into my phone, my email, my texts, everything. I was being surveilled. They had released my name to activists in the TCH transgender program who had defamed me online. They said I had abused patients, that I mutilated patients, that I was sexually abusing patients in clinic rooms. And I knew that this was coming from the hospital. And it was only a couple of months later that we found out that the person who did this admitted it to an FBI agent. We know who this person was, right? What did the hospital do to stop it? Nothing. They were letting this person defame me as I was starting my first job. But we thought, if we just push back, I can stay anonymous. We just have to push back. But hopefully she just gives up. She just cuts her losses, But it wasn't the case. In October of that year of 2023, my attorneys have a phone call with her, and she goes on an unhinged rant, Tina, I'm sorry. And she tells my attorneys that she's going to take me to a jury trial, even on a technicality, even if she's going to lose, right? Violating every single rule for a federal prosecutor. And I know this because my wife is one. And at that moment, I remember talking to my attorneys, I could sense fear in their voice, right? And these are big dog attorneys. They're not frightened easily, but they were not frightened for themselves. They were frightened for me, and I could hear it in their voice, because they knew that the government was going to destroy me. They were going to destroy every part of me. And at that moment, it was another one of those moments. Do we either preserve our soul, or do we give it up? And we decided to fight back, because if she was going to take me down, then we would at least go down fighting. And if she was going to take me to a jury trial, then I might as well get ready for it. And that's what I did. I took my story public in January of 2024. It was the scariest, most frightening thing I've ever done. We're very private people. I think I had a panic attack that day, because I did an interview with Ben Shapiro. He's a fast talker, and I was very nervous, and I puked afterwards, and I think that was a panic attack. And I told the story to as many people as possible. We raised like $250,000 into our legal fund, and by that point, we had spent everything we had, $350,000. Every single dollar we had to our names was gone. But we told our story, and people were standing behind us, and there was this weight lifted off of us. And in one sense, you tell the truth and you become set free, but then another load gets put on. And it was like this purgatory, because once I went public, I had thrown down, I threw down the gauntlet. The ball was in her court. The line of communication was done. We didn't know what she was doing. Was she continuing the case, or was she going to drop it? Every single second of every single day, I was just waiting for that armada of federal agents to be behind, one corner, to be behind a door. Eventually they were going to come. I knew it. And every single day that weight got greater. And then one day, it came. It was a year after the agents first came to my home. On June 4th, 2024, at 7 a.m., 3 heavily armed U.S. Marshals showed up to my home like I was some type of drug dealer, some type of murderer, That was the day that I found out that I was being charged with 4 HIPAA-based felonies that faced up to 10 years in federal prison. And that's when everything changed. You know, we had challenged Tina, now Tina was challenging us, and I'll tell you what, that indictment made me sound like a criminal. It made it seem like I was lying about needing access to Texas Children's Hospital. I had no patience there, that I had released information to the public to harm these kids. Of course, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, NBC, CNN, all these media organizations pick up this story that the DOJ put out. All of it was a complete lie. It only took us a couple of weeks to disprove all of it. We showed that the DOJ's own evidence, the evidence they gave us in discovery, had disproved every single one of the allegations they made against me. And that's worth restating. Their own evidence disproved what they were charging me with. So what that means is that they either ignored their evidence, or they either never looked at their evidence, or they looked at it and ignored it. I think the latter is more likely. They manufactured an indictment, put 10 years of prison in front of me, and thought I was going to come crawling on my knees and beg for a plea deal. But they thought wrong, because we're going to challenge him. So, at that same time too, we also found out that Tina Ansari was practicing law with a suspended law license. Right? Come on. So, we hear this, and yeah, that's like a big problem. Basic DOJ policy, don't do that. That's also a felony in Texas. And so we thought to ourselves, like, man, we got this. We're like, this is going to be over soon. We made the mistake of hope, and it was dangerous because we hoped that actually something good might happen. But Judge Hittner, the judge who was presiding over the case, nothing, right? Tina Ansari's problem with her bar license, just swept it under the rug, ignored it. It was nothing. Her problem, the problem with the indictment, all the evidence disproving all of their allegations, now that's just a mulligan, right? They got a second indictment. They charged me with the same crimes, but just upped the enhancements. And of course, what you're thinking is, how could they charge the same crimes when all the evidence pointed to my innocence? Well, you don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. Neither do my lawyers. We had no idea what they were charging me with. We had no idea. But it gets worse from there because in the second indictment, they changed some key language. We knew that they were changing it because they knew I was pushing back. It was a HIPAA-based indictment, but they removed the term disclosure, right? They changed the victims from TCH and its patients to TCH and its physicians. So for the first time in American history, HIPAA, which is a law that's used to protect patient privacy, was being used to protect a multi-billion-dollar hospital system and the doctors who were caught lying about a program that was mutilating vulnerable young children. How is this possible? And I remember thinking to myself, there must be something more here, right? Like Tina Ansari, yeah, it's ideological, but she can't be this shameless. There has to be something more, like maybe a conflict of interest. Like maybe there was some money in it. And it was last year at a Texas Values event that, it was before the event, and someone from the Texas legislature comes up to me and says, "Oh, Dr. Haim, I've heard your story. I went to school with Tina Ansari's brother, Ollie Ansari. You should really look into that family, right? They've got some problems." So a couple of weeks after that, it lingered in my mind, and this was when everything was happening with the second indictment. It lingered in my mind about her brother, Ollie Ansari. So 2 weeks after that, it was a night I couldn't sleep. I was up, which happened a lot. And I thought, I'm gonna look this up, right? So I started looking up her brother, and I found out that he went to a TCH fundraiser with the president of TCH right after his sister sent agents to my home. But it just gets worse. And to say these were conflicts of interest, would be the understatement of a century. It's more accurate to say you couldn't throw a tennis ball at Tina Ansari's Thanksgiving dinner without hitting a major TCH or Baylor fundraiser, a former TCH board member, or a CEO who has contracts with hospitals under the TCH and Baylor Academic Consortium. It was like third world level corruption. The victims in the indictment were the ones who her family stood the most to benefit from. And once I uncovered this, I started to feed it to my attorneys. And they started to think, yeah, there's something here. And then once everything kind of became real, we knew that we had Tina dead to rights. We knew that she kind of slipped away with the first indictment, with the law license being suspended. But with these conflicts of interest, there was no way she was getting out of it. And the second indictment also fell apart because they left a critical typo in. Instead of subchapter XI, they wrote subchapter XL. Problem, because that subchapter doesn't exist. So they had to get another indictment, and then Tina Ansari steps away from the case. So that was a big win for us. Tina Ansari was gone. But the new lead prosecutor, Jessica Feinstein, had come up with a third indictment a couple of days after that. This was in late November. And the worst part about it was that not only did they come out with 3 indictments, but they also came out with a gag order on that same day. And a gag order for me, someone who's never been recognized publicly, someone who has no capacity to influence a jury. The arguments they made in their motion was that they were worried about online bullying. That's actually what they wrote online bullying. That's in their motion. It was unbelievable. Because by that point, the only way I had funded my legal defense was speaking out. It was the only tool I had. It was the only way for me to tell the truth about what was happening. I didn't have any money, I didn't have any connections, I had nothing. The only thing I had was the truth. And I thought there was no way the judge is going to give in to this. There's no way a judge can look at this argument and say, yes, we should gag this person. But like I said before, it always gets worse. Because on December 3rd, we had a hearing, and it was like the judge was part of some English royalty, like he was some aristocrat, and it was the first time he heard about a peasant, right, criticizing the royalty. It was like he had never seen it before. He was clutching his pearls. He was totally on the side of the government, just for the fact of me criticizing the government, pointing out their mistakes, trying to fund my own legal defense. That was something that was wrong. So what did he do? He did the worst thing possible. He didn't grant the gag order. It makes sense because he would become the laughingstock of the entire legal world. But he didn't deny the gag order because he wanted to silence me. What did he do, right? So he just threatened to send me to jail if I continued, quote, similar conduct. But without similar conduct being defined, I don't know what I can or can't say. I can't appeal anything because there's no order. And I couldn't appeal it anyway because I'm $1 million in debt. And he knew that. So it was like a checkmate. We had gone through everything. And at that moment, I was done. I had to stay silent. I felt like I had to stay silent. What other option did I have? We had lost everything. And after that moment, every single time something happened, I felt like I was able to handle it. Every single time, it was like another block of concrete being tied to my legs. And I was treading water, and every time it pulls you down a little bit further. And then this time, it was one block too many, and I had just descended to the pits of hell, to the absolute rock bottom. I had been consumed by a world of darkness. Because to have that one tool taken away from me was the most dehumanizing thing I had ever experienced in my entire life. Every single second of every single day was just despair, was absolute anger, was hatred, was pity for myself, because why me? I had done the right thing, but now I was being punished. How is this possible in our country? We just had our first daughter. And how is this possible? But during that time, I had to think to myself, there were so many people who believed in me, right? Like, there's so many people who say, we were praying for you. But the reason they say they were praying for me is because we were fighting. And that was the hardest thing, was that, I felt like I was letting everyone down. And it just took time. Yeah, I might go to jail. But that's okay. Because in order to preserve my soul, I had to sacrifice. And it became, every single day, I got closer to it. Every single day, I became stronger. I had dissolved. Every single cell in my body had separated from itself. I had become someone else when I hit that rock bottom. But then over time, kind of like built back up. These bonds had formed, but it was because of people like you, right? These prayers, the belief in something we were doing. And something was going to happen. I knew that we had to challenge what was going on. And that day came on January 22nd, 2 days after Trump's inauguration, 2 days after he signed his weaponization order, ending the weaponization of the Department of Justice. Because behind the scenes, what the DOJ and the Southern District was doing was escalating the case towards trial. After Trump was inaugurated, after that order, in direct contradiction to it. And what does that mean? Every single day is another $50,000. Every single day is $60,000, $70,000. And going towards a trial in February that we knew where the judge was on the side of government, where they were going to eliminate my best defenses being brought into the courtroom. So enough was enough. I was going to enter a game of chicken with a federal judge. We were going to have to fight it out. If he was going to have to send me to jail, then he would have to do it in front of the entire country. So I spoke out on January 22nd in defiance of his fake de facto gag order. I called out the DOJ. I called out the acting U.S. Attorney, Jennifer Lowry. My wife did too. She had spoken out a couple weeks earlier after the gag order. And most importantly, we called out the judge for running a kangaroo court, because that's exactly what he was doing. And we knew he was going to be angry, but we didn't think he was going to be this angry. Because I spoke out on January 22nd. On January 23rd, we knew things were getting a little heavy. I get a call from my attorneys that night on January 23rd, and they say, Judge Hittner is livid. I say, why? He never signed an order, right? I have a First Amendment. But they say, there was no point in questioning it. It's not, the question of legal or not doesn't matter. We had gone beyond that point. What they were telling me is that tomorrow, Judge Hittner's going to sign an arrest warrant for you. He's also going to move your trial up a month early to Monday. I would have no chance of a fair trial, no witnesses, no one. The only way to get out of it is if you sign an agreement with the government. It was a pretrial diversion. What were the conditions of that agreement? I could never sue the government. I could never criticize the government. And I could never criticize TCH or Baylor College of Medicine, but no one in my family could either. The way to avoid being sent to jail the next day and going into an unfair trial that Monday was to sign an agreement I would have never signed. We get off that call, my wife and I look at each other and we say, yeah, we're being extorted by a federal judge. And I signed that agreement. I didn't tell my attorneys I was going to violate it on that Monday because it was signed under duress. It was completely phony. But I had to operate the next day and I didn't want to get arrested in the operating room. But I signed it. I signed something I would have never signed because I was being extorted by a federal judge. In what country were we living in? So the next day comes around. The one thing we were praying for was that main justice. The people who came to power after the greatest political revolution, after the first American Revolution, right? These were the people we were relying on. And me, right? Like, how did I think they were going to come to help me? I didn't think they were going to do anything. But that was our Hail Mary. if Maine Justice had issued guidance to the Southern District and told them to dismiss this case, everything would be gone. But I didn't think about that for a second. I didn't think it was possible. So I wake up the next morning. Well, that night I gave all of my media contacts to my wife, and including Jonathan Sains and everyone else who had helped us out throughout this time. Because I was getting ready to go to jail the next day, right? The judge was this unhinged. Who could tell what he was going to do, right? So I go to work, I operate on my patients. I almost expect that there's going to be feds outside my office. But, I go and operate, everything goes well, no feds. I go home, right? Still no feds. And I'm, at this time too, we're just getting phone calls. Everyone in the media, they're hearing about what's going on, this kind of like last battle between good and evil. This crazy game of chicken between some random doctor and some federal judge. And he's threatening to send me to jail and move up my trial. And I'm on the phone with these two guys from the Daily Wire. And then all of a sudden I hear my wife scream from the other room. And I knew it was either going to be really good or really bad. Like it was either going to be the feds or something else. And she comes in our bedroom where I was talking, and she says, "The case is dismissed with prejudice. It's done. It's over. The case is dismissed." And I remember exactly where I was, what I was wearing, what the light was, what I was looking at. And it was my daughter and my wife, and we just said, "It's over, it's over, it's over." And it was the greatest moment ever, because we had fought the Leviathan. We had overcome the greatest odds, and we won. We did it. It was something that we never thought was possible. We had given up everything, but we won. And if there's one thing to take away, it's that people always say that you have to fight now so that your children don't have to fight. I think that's wrong. I think we have to fight now so that we can teach them how to fight.
Yeah.
Because that really is what a parent is supposed to do. They have to get their kids ready for the future. They have to get them ready to fight these battles, to fight this evil, because every single one of us know that what we're up against is something very bad, right? These are two competing views of the world that are irreconcilable. We love freedom. We love liberty. We love our God and to live a good life, but these people want to destroy that. And there's one last quote I want to leave everyone with. And it's one of those things that got me through the most difficult times. And it's especially something for you too, because things will get tough. But it's from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I always thought about it. It's the way you have to fight, right? It's because this was only regular people. So he writes, "The most terrifying force of death comes from the hands of men who just want to be left alone. They try so very hard to mind their own business, to provide for themselves and the ones they love. They resist every impulse to fight, knowing that the permanent change of life that will come from it. They know the moment they fight back, their lives as they lived them before are over. The moment they decide to fight back is a form of suicide. They are literally killing themselves. They're killing off who they once were, which is why, when forced to fight, they do so with an unholy vengeance against those who murdered their former selves. They fight with raw hate in a drive that cannot be fathomed by those who are merely play-acting at politics and terror. The terror will arrive at those people's doorstep, and they will cry and they will scream and they will beg for mercy. But it will fall upon deaf ears of the men who just wanted to be left alone. So when they come for you, when they show up to your door, make sure they know that they knocked on the wrong door.
Yeah.